Hi, friends and family,
Welcome to Hope After Addiction
with your host, Katie Comer.
and Chelsea McLeod.
Hi, welcome to Hope After Addiction. We're so happy that you've joined us today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Had a good week. It's been warm. It is full swing of summer.
Yes, it is.
I don't know when you're watching this, but here it's supposed to be like in the hundreds this week. So it's just crazy.
Yep.
So, but you're about to go somewhere. I don't know when this will be released,
Yeah.
but you're going to and I can't wait to hear about it. But is it hot?
Yes, it is hot.
Super
but,
hot.
yeah, opposite seasons. So
Oh.
this will be more or less their winter. So it's
Okay.
still warm because you're near the equator, but it's not as warm. It's actually the perfect season, blue skies and low humidity.
Oh, good. I can't wait to hear about it. I don't think when this gets released that you have gone yet, but
Yeah,
I'm
no.
excited to hear about it when you get
I'm
back.
pumped. I know. It's
I
time.
know.
It's been 3 years, so we're excited.
Yay.
Yeah.
So happy that you've joined us today. Today we're going to be talking about something. This topic specifically came from people that said, I need to know about this. And this is another encouragement. I'll say this at the end. We get a lot of our topics from people who reach out to us and we've talked to and saying, this is where I'm struggling. Talk about this on your podcast. So today we're going to be talking about that first week out of rehab and what that means for you and how you're going to deal with this. And it's scary.
It's terrifying.
I mean, because they go in, and I always say you get the most rest, the most sleep, the most peace when your loved one who's addicted is in rehab because you know that they're safe. You know that they're getting the healing that they need. But when they're out, however long it's been, but when they're out and they join you in the real life, it's terrifying. So that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And so many get excited. They're like pumped. They're like, they're getting out next week. And then it comes time and they're like,
real
what
time.
do I do? How do I
know.
handle this? The anxiety's kicking in.
Yeah.
So
And it did for us too. I mean, our stories are a little different because Adam went in over 10 years ago and he never left because he ended up staying on staff and then now runs S2L, and John's the same way.
yeah.
But they still had to come home to us.
Yeah. And I think that was my scariest moment is you're not there 24/7. You're home. You've got more freedom. You've got your cell phone. You've got your car.
Yeah.
You know.
So there's still some tough stuff that we had to deal with personally to kind of get us to where we are today. We're fully trusting and all that stuff, but it's a moment.
Yeah.
It's a moment.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that I would say when I was preparing for this is I remember sitting down and writing out somewhat of a boundary list or things that Adam was okay with me doing when he got out of rehab. And almost like a contract, if you will, saying, I'm willing to do this if I come and live with you.
Yeah.
And so that's being on a cash only basis. I don't know, whatever it is for you that makes you feel comfortable. But for me, it was like being on a cash only basis for a while. Me being able to look at your cell phone at any time, being able to take a drug test anytime that I want you to. We have them on
Location.
hand,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So, and he signed his name, and those were boundaries that I created in that season. And we'll get to this in a little bit. In that season of them first coming home from rehab.
Yeah.
But that's important to say in that
It's
season.
huge. Yeah.
But-
In the season.
Yeah.
That's right. And we did the same thing. Ours was like location was on, same. It was all debit card because I could see and receipts were there. There was a lot of those same things. And John wanted that. That was one of the good things is he said, I want to rebuild trust with you. And he said, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And he said, if I'm not hiding anything, then I have no reason to not be transparent about everything.
Yeah.
And that is marriage, is transparency in every aspect. And so that was one thing that greatly helped us to continue on that path. And even days he'd be a little more energized, or his eyes looked a certain way. And I mean, he'd look at me and he'd go take a drug test, and it calmed my fears. Yep.
Yeah.
So every time my fears were put to rest, I was able to move to that next level of trust.
Yeah. So, whatever that looks like for you when they first get out of rehab, I think having that communication open, saying, the trust has been broken, right? I know that you have found healing from this addiction, but my heart has not quite yet. And so I feel comfortable this, and this. Do you agree with that to be able to come live with me?
Yep. And maybe that be that conversation before
it
they
needs
get
to
out.
Be beforehand.
Yeah.
Just because they have, I know at S2L, that's our sister company that we, or rehab that we deal with, they have counselors there that they deal with. So if you're able to bring that in, at the table before you get out, they can talk with their counselor and say, this is what they're expecting of me. You know, I'm feeling this sort of way about that. I feel like they don't trust me. Well,
yeah.
They don't. So
Yep. I just had them
towards that.
Right. And you can. That's the beautiful thing. I was just working with a mom, and it was the same questions of when her son comes home. Well, what if he does this, or what if he does this? And I recommended your contract.
Yeah.
And I was like, these are the boundaries. If you do this, if you use drugs here, you're not allowed here.
Yeah.
It's just a boundary, and they need that. If they're walking right, they want that.
Yeah.
John wanted that accountability. So that's a necessary thing.
Yeah. And I think when I said in this season, I think a lot of people can take this contract and take these boundaries and run with them for a really long time. And these guys get out. We teach and preach true freedom from addiction at S2L. And I really believe that these guys have found freedom from it. And that's just something that's in their past. And so for them to come home and have all of these boundaries up, I think it's healthy in the season. But if you don't allow yourself to begin to trust them, you've got to let some of those boundaries go.
Yep.
It's important for them. It's important for their healing, and it's important for your healing to show, hey, I'm starting to trust you. So now I'm going to not, you can start using the debit card or the credit card or whatever it is, but I'm still going to look at it.
Yeah.
Like you've got to start building that trust up. So you've got to start letting that go eventually. And you'll kind of know in your heart when that is. But you've got to allow them to build that trust back.
Yep.
Not just always helicopter.
Yeah. No hovering, and there's a level of that, but that's why the contract's in place to not have to hover. Like, these are our boundaries. True. This is what we have.
That's true.
And there's actually a psychological level to that too, is when they've walked into freedom, their mind isn't constantly on the alcohol, the drugs, the sex, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
When we continue to bring it up, we are putting their mind back on it. And so that's one of the big things is, a lot of women, and I did it his first time, but I would hover over him and continually talk about it, ask about it. Boy, it was taking John's mind back to it, where he's come out of it. He's walked out of it. I'm bringing his thoughts back to it. And so that's one of the biggest things, is just be careful not to bring them back constantly to the thoughts of a place that they've walked into freedom from.
Yeah. It can begin to be an unhealthy thing.
Very, yeah.
And so I think it starts out when I talk about this, I have to make sure that I follow it up with, but that needs to subside, if you will, eventually, because I think it can be just like super unhealthy in some cases.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Location was that for us. We eventually turned it off because I got to where I was watching it too much.
Oh, okay.
And we decided, we're like, okay, it's done. We still have location on for safety purposes, but I rarely check it unless he's headed home and I need to put the potatoes in.
That's a different circumstance.
Yeah, that's a different story.
That's fine. It's fine.
Yep. Yeah. Another point we wanted to focus on was, you've worked so hard to heal, and don't lose that, because it can be codependency can come back in when they're home. You put your focus back on them and not on your healing anymore.
That's good.
And so you've worked so hard to heal and to overcome this and walk through this. Don't put your focus back on them. Still go for the run. Still paint your nails. Still take time for you. Because if you start putting that focus back on them, you're going to go back to square one.
Yeah.
And it will push them away. Yeah. A lot of self-care. Even more so, I would say, when they're home. Like, don't be afraid to go for the run and leave them at home. That's okay. I'm saying this stuff from experience. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when Adam I had moved back up here from Knoxville, and then he came to live with me for the first time. So he had been here. He had been in S2L Pro for 8 or 9 months at the time. So it was a long time. Right. And so when he first came back to me, I had to like really work on continuing that self-care. But it was a little different too, because we didn't know anybody. We just knew each other. That's true. So I had to kind of find ways to have that self-care and not focus on myself. I say I did a pretty good job of it, but if I had this podcast, I'd be better at it.
No kidding. Me too.
So just like a reminder, I need to make sure they don't fall back into those old patterns of codependency, and it's just not healthy. Just make sure that you're focusing on yourself.
Yep. For either one of you, it's not healthy.
Yeah.
So another point is it may be a little awkward. Like Katie said, Adam was there 8 or 9 months. John was the same. And so when he came home, you got to think they have their own routines. They've been living by themselves or with a bunch of guys for months. You've got your own routines. You've got your routines with the kids, with your job, whatever it may be. So when they come home, there are going to be some moments that are a little awkward, a little off.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Grace that. You're working together to do and to begin life together again.
They are a new creation. Yeah. A lot of these guys have found freedom from Christ because they found Christ.
Yeah.
And so it's a new person, which is great. That's what's keeping them in that spirit of, being clean and healthy, freed from addiction. But you're getting to know somebody that's a new person too. And so it's a little scary, but also comforting, because you know that they're not that old person anymore. And so I think there's so much beauty when I see couples reunite and they're like, it's like not the person I married.
No, we just talked for 3 hours.
It's like different. I remember I was actually talking to somebody and that was dealing with this stuff. And I remember it was like 3 weeks in, and I talked to Adam on the phone for the first time, 3 or 4 weeks in. And I talked to Adam on the phone for the first time, and his voice sounded different.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's weird. But it's because he had found Christ in those 3 weeks I hadn't talked to him. He literally was a different person. So you can imagine 8, 9 more months of that, and then he moved back in with me. I was like getting to know a whole new human. But it was great.
Yeah.
It was great. It's just, it takes some time. It takes some communication. Yeah. It takes some patience, because you're relearning each other. And so it's important for you all to communicate in that way of and give each other a break, if you will, just because you're relearning each other. So
and that's a really good point, because for both sides, hopefully, prayerfully, you've worked really hard to heal during this. So he's also coming out and meeting a whole new you. You're meeting a whole new him.
Yeah.
There may even be boundaries that you put down that you never were a boundaries person. And, it's going to take grace from both sides. Y'all both have never been here before.
Yeah.
A lot of grace for each other, but y'all are both meeting these new human beings in Christ, and you're walking together in that, which is really fun to watch, cool. Too. It's so fun to watch. Yeah. I just had one of the girls that I work with, and they went on a pass one weekend, and she was like, Chelsea, we talked for like 3 hours at the restaurant. Like we had first started dating again. And it's because all things aside, like they're getting to reconnect again in those ways. And it's just so cool to watch.
Yeah. I remember those passes. Those are so fun.
They're so much fun.
I know.
Yeah. It's like giddy.
I know.
Yeah.
This kind of goes along with the self-care. continuing that self-care, but I would encourage continued counseling.
Yes.
Because a lot of times when they get out, you kind of forget about some of the stuff that you did, like I said, of self-care. But the one thing that I think would be beneficial is to continue your counseling and even bring your loved one in on the counseling. So that way you can communicate some of the stuff that you're dealing with, maybe some of the feelings that are coming up. You can communicate with a counselor. They can kind of guide you in some of those feelings. So I would continue the whole counseling aspect for sure.
I think that is imperative. And like Jorian was saying earlier, we were talking about counseling, but to have that mediator there that kind of understands both sides, because there is going to be a lot that comes out that's brought up, and you are a little scared. Like, I don't want to make them, and you can't do that, but it's to have that mediator, to sit down with that person, to share your heart, to share his heart, or to share, whoever's in the situation where y'all get to talk about it, communicate it, and put it to rest.
Love that.
And I tell a lot of my girls, have it set up before they get out. And every week, do not miss that, because these girls, they've been counseling every week, multiple times a week, most of the time. And so keep on that journey, because they've been counseling with themselves. You've been counseling with yourself. Now y'all can walk into that and counsel together. I know John and I did for years. And I was talking to Jordan about that earlier. Like, I wouldn't trade that for the world. And there was a lot of days that we needed it. Just the mediator, just somebody to say, hey, I think this is what John's trying to say, or hey, let's look at it this way, John. I think this is Chelsea's heart.
I love that.
So I love that you brought that up, because that's so important.
Yeah.
So important. All right. Another big one. And I had a counselor work with me on this, but do not immediately jump to their old selves when you see an old behavior. They're still learning to tamper out the old man, as I call it, or the old woman. And so you're going to see old behaviors come back. And there's been times that I'm like, there he is. You're going to do it again. You're just going to go back to it.
Yeah.
Those behaviors are going to come out. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to have old behaviors. We are learning to be the new creature and creation that God has made us. And so I had a psychologist, and I think I've talked about on here, but he said it's almost like one shoulder, like John, the new John and the old John.
Oh, yeah.
And he said the old John's going to come out, but the new John is going to continue to put him out. The more this new John comes through, the more the old John is silenced. And it takes time. I mean, there's still things that John will do, and I'm like, but it is amazing to see who he is today, the way he handles situations.
Yeah.
All of it compared to who he was. So when you see those old behaviors, don't jump to the worst case scenario, I guess is the best way to put it.
That's true.
Because it's really easy to do, but don't jump there, because you'll drive yourself crazy. And just know he's still working. She's still working. They're still healing. We're 6 years into this, and we're still healing all the time, which is precious.
That's true.
So.
I think that reflecting on where and this is something I think we actually just mentioned before this podcast, but reflecting on where you've come from is important too. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important not to stay there, because I think that could be unhealthy too, but reflecting on where you've been and seeing how God's pulled you through that. And we talked about this last week on the podcast about, trusting where God's pulled you from and knowing that he's got you and he's got your back, and that he'll continue to do that, and trusting that God's pulled you from the muck and the mire, into something beautiful, and that he's got your back. Yeah. And reflecting on what the past was to where you are now. I think there's something beautiful in that. And just sitting down and saying, God, you've done so much more than I could have ever imagined, and reflecting on all those beautiful moments that God took you from,
I love that. So. And the stillness, that reminds me, in that reflection is when you have one of those moments, when you see an old behavior, when something arises, go take a walk. Yeah. Take 10 minutes and reflect on what God has done. And it is amazing what God will do in those 10 minutes to remind you and to calm your spirit when you need it most.
Love that. Yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that you felt encouraged today. I know this is a big one, and we hear this a lot about getting out of rehab. I don't know what to do. Yeah. Everybody's in your position. Everybody has that moment of like, oh, I don't know what to do. But we hope some of these points that we shared with you offer some encouragement that you're not alone. One, I think that this whole podcast offers that ability to say, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Because we get that a lot. We're like, what you said, like, that's just like what I feel.
Yeah.
So it's because we've been there. So we kind of know how you're feeling. And so this is the same way. We know what you're feeling. We know the anxiety that kind of comes up with them getting out of rehab that first week. But we hope that you found some encouragement on how to maybe deal with some of that stuff. Reach out to us if you have a question. You can find us at Hope After Addiction on Instagram and on Facebook. And we even have an email if you want to email us something. But if you have a topic maybe we haven't talked about, reach out to us. That's how we've gotten actually even this podcast, is just people going through stuff and be like, my husband is about to get out of rehab. What do I do? So it just kind of naturally comes along with some of these topics. So reach out to us and follow us on those. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you give us a like and a follow. We would love that, and communicate. We like to communicate with you all on that. So we hope you felt encouraged. We can't wait for next week, and we hope you have a blessed day.